I'm so grateful to be here with you, my listeners. Thanks for giving me just a few minutes of your time. Tell a friend about my show, and my numbers will soar. I will have 200% of my listenership than I do now. That would be you and your friends. So tell a friend about me. We're live on Facebook at Nougat Radio, and also live on YouTube at the same moniker, Nougat Radio. And on your smartphone, get the TuneIn Radio app. It's free, and just type in Hot News Talk Radio. And there we are. Love your neighbor and buy local is my slogan. And David Toole is here. I argue for local economy and the free market. I'm trying to be better at my argument. And also, I want to see the faults in it. It is an argument that is partial. And I always write everything in pencil, even though I'm the blogger with the biggest pen. I keep it all in pencil because I'm subject to revision and correction. And perhaps maybe some correction from Hugh Whelchel, who is from the Institute of Faith, Work, and Economics in McLean, Virginia, who's just finished quoting Robin Moore in a book review at Christianity Today, the left-wing movie maker and defender of the progressive ethic. We have a better ethic to defend, and I hope to live out the ethic, if you will, of local economy and the free market. And the summary of that scenario is: near is better than far, small than big, and simple than complex. And in the footnotes at 5-point type, and of course you know the font, it's the Helvetica font, the neutral Swiss font, where the letters do not have the serifs, which are the little feet or shoes on some of the letters, which are really knives, right? We know that government people, when they write their laws and their code books and their statutes, always use serifs because their words have cutting power. And every A on its feet has two little blades because it walks on people and it cuts them. And that's what we have with progressivism and statism. And, well, just good old warmed over humanism. 5-point type personal is better than corporate, and physical than abstract. So these are some of the themes, you might say, of Nouganomics.com, and also yournews.com, our sponsor. The number is 800-8949. That's 800-8949 on the David Toole Show. And Hugh Whelchel, I've got a question for you. I'm arguing for local economy, and use that as a kind of summary of what I would call in church, perhaps I would call it the fruits of sanctification, the fruits of holy living, and suggest that the listener identify with local, identify with his locale, and serve people here in his business. What might be the strength of this theory, and what might be the faults of it? Where does it fall apart?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And I don't think it falls apart because you got to start somewhere, and everything is local. One of the things we were talking about in the last segment is that, the Bible tells us, one of our jobs is to subdue the earth. And literally, that word subdue is the Hebrew word kabosh, which means, in that context, to go make the earth an incredible place for human beings to flourish. Now, how do we do that? How do the people in Chattanooga go out and do that today, right? I spoke at a conference several years ago in Missoula, Montana. The river, river runs through it. It's a gorgeous place. It's where the book was written. And did a conference on faith and work and how all these things work. And then I actually preached at a church. And afterwards, a man came up to me and said, he said, I heard everything you said. And he said, you have to understand, he says, I'm 55 years old. I wash dishes for a living. And he said, but what you told me, I'd never heard. I didn't know that I could do work, that my work really contributed to the greater good of our community. He said, but what you have told me, that every dish I wash, if I do it to the glory of God and to the best of my ability, do it with excellence, that somehow that work connects with something someone else does and something someone else does in the restaurant. And together, all of our work bring flourishing to people in our community when they come to our restaurant. And see, that's the way we've got to look at our work, that no matter what we're doing, you can bring flourishing even if you're not a Fortune 500 CEO, even if you're not running your own business, if you're just a dishwasher. By doing your work to the best of your ability, at a level of excellence with integrity and honesty, and these are the things that drive good work, and we desperately need that. And when you begin to do that, it has an incredible effect on the people around you, and it will not go unnoticed.
Does a man who runs a dishwasher in a restaurant, Hugh Whelchel, have social capital, or is he only minimum wage just a potential recipient of other people's social capital and other people's spiritual capital.
And see, that's what we have to get away with. A lot of people feel that way, and they feel powerless, they feel hopeless. But see, this is an amazing idea if we can really take hold of it. It is our work that was designed to give us significance. It is our work that is what really drives everything that has ever been accomplished. It's individual work at an individual level. And see, here's the interesting thing. Throughout history, Christians have understood this concept. In fact, I would argue, although it's been written out of the history books by secular historians, I would argue that forget the last 150 years, but go back and look at the last 2,000 years in Western civilization. Almost everything that's been done, whether it was great art, great music, abolishing slavery, and women's suffrage, great inventions, was done by believers who understood the calling in their life was to go and use the gifts and the talents they had within the context of the opportunities they were given to bring flourishing to their communities, right? And it's done on a local level. That's where it starts. And that's kind of that mindset has to be brought back. And a lot of that is building social capital, right? A lot of these believers, made inventions, did things that not only blessed other Christians, but blessed everybody in the community, right? The whole community. And I think that's something we've got to get back to because it's the key to improving our society. And unfortunately, if you look at you talked about the economic freedom, there are a couple of groups that actually measure economic freedom across countries and kind of rate all the countries in the world based on economic freedom. And the scary thing is the United States has always been near the top, but we're slowly falling year after year after year. We're down to 8th or 9th now, I think, in these things. That should concern all of us. And that fall, we can blame it on the government. We can blame it on a lot of things. But part of it is most of us are sitting on the sidelines, and we are not taking our work seriously. And that work, once again, is not just the work that you get paid for in your vocation. It's also the work you're called to do in your community. Here's a scary statistic. Look at how many people vote in elections, right? I believe just being the low bar of being a good citizen in your community is at least going out and vote, being informed and going out and vote. But we find that more and more people say it just doesn't matter. I can't make a difference. And this mindset is robbing people of the opportunity to find great significance and purpose in their lives today. And once again, it all starts on a local level.
Well, don't you think there are things much more important than voting, that voting really doesn't matter? Because really voting, if my listener votes, it doesn't really matter. One vote doesn't matter, but he can have a much better effect by being looking out for others in his business, extending charity with his business or personally, maybe tithing. These are all things that have much more salting effect than simply voting for a candidate for Judge B or A.
Yep, but I still think it's important. It's a piece of the community. Like I said earlier, I think if you look at all of our work, it falls into 4 buckets, right? And basically, from a biblical perspective, you see it as our call to vocation. We're called to work in a vocational setting. We're called to work in our churches. We're called to work in our families, and we're called to work in our communities. I mean, the community work, the Good Samaritan story, that's a classic example of our responsibility to the community, of helping other people, of being generous. And I would think, and part of that is making sure we elect people that put government in its right perspective. Here's one of the big problems, right? I'm a committed Christian. I believe in the scriptures. I believe very clearly that God ordained government for a purpose. But today, government's taken it's taken a bigger bite of the apple than it deserves. I mean, it's grown so much and it's gotten into so many things. You look at all the regulations that are on businesses, and they stifle creativity. They stifle free market economics. I mean, we don't have true free market economics today because the government has such control. And then what's happened is they have such control that a lot of companies have gone and made a deal with the devil, right? They've cut deals with the government. We call this cronyism. So they get special treatment that other people don't. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse.
Right. But
so I think that, that there is a place for the average citizen to understand that he has a say in the size of government. And we kind of think, well, there's nothing I can do. There is something you can do. And I think that's critically important.
And so we need to
get back to a place where we have free market.
We need to have candidates who are vigilantly pro-market, not pro-business. Hugh Whelchel of the Institute for Faith and Work and Economics, but for the free market. And there is a difference. If you're pro-business, you're just a regular Republican or Democrat. Those are the pro-business parties, and they are for the cronies. They are for they don't want to peel back and pare back big government, and so they have to, by necessity, the duopoly has to support these hangers-on who have their contracts and their private statutes and private law and so on.
That's right. If you want to read about the idea of limited government and how it is a biblical thing, we have several papers on our website at the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics. You should go read them. It's www.tifwe.org. Because this is an important concept. I have friends, some of my libertarian friends say, we just don't need any government at all. No, that's not true. We do need government. We need order. We need someone to maintain. I mean, if you don't think we need government, look at some of the countries around the world where there's anarchy. Nothing gets done. There's no property rights. Property rights is one of the cornerstones as God designed to build wealth and to build economies. And if you don't have that, you look at a place like Afghanistan. There's no rule of law. There's no property rights. Their civilization is never going to improve until you begin to lay the foundations for those type of things. So there is a role for government, but based on what the Bible teaches, it's very, very limited.
Let me ask you a question about
our government succeeded that considerably.
Let me ask you a question, Hugh Whelchel, about one area in which I think 100% of Christians and other people whom I've addressed reject as a concept which is exciting and different, and that is your shantytown is my housing free trade zone argument, one that was raised in the Chattanooga mayoral campaign by me recently. And the idea is that we have no bottom of the housing market. The housing market is forbidden to exist by regulations on by building codes effectively, and their adoption by municipal corporations, cities, and counties as well. And so the overseer, the officer is always there to prevent anything from being created in the way of a dwelling that doesn't meet code. And a shantytown idea, there are shantytowns worldwide where by adverse possession, people effectively come to own pieces of land and put their little shacks on those pieces of land. I think we could regularize that here in Chattanooga and have it so that if have the city divide out seized property for homeless people and say, if you live on this homeless spot, let's say 100 feet by 75 feet for 2.5 years, we will give you title to it. So a homeless person has a commitment to stay and not to keep wandering. He has a place where he can build something to secure his property, which is very important and a grave problem among the homeless, the inability to store property. And then they can become members of Chattanooga. They become residents, and then they'll have a capital asset that they can trade, sell, or buy 2.5 years out. And that's an idea that I've been told universally is simply unworkable because you have ugly places. You'll have an ugly section of town with a lot of blue tarpaulin. Hugh Whelchel, what do you make of that kind of free market analysis?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and you can see why so many people kind of push back on it. But you have to realize that that's an important step, I think, in having people who are homeless, begin to pull themselves out of that situation. Here's the thing. Do we want those people just to live in Shantytown forever? No. We want to see them flourish, right? We want systems in place that helps everybody flourish. So that would be not a place where they'd be permanently interned, right? But it'd be a stepping stone for them to a better life. I think if you see it and talk about it in that context, it makes some real sense. We have a PhD economist here at works for us, Ann Bradley, and she gets into some really heated discussions sometimes around the whole idea of sweatshops, right? And, we're just appalled by sweatshops. In fact, there was a big thing several years ago where I think it was Nike or somebody was found out that they were making their shoes in some sweatshops in the Philippines or in Indochina somewhere. And people it was outrage. And, they found out that the, children were working in these things, 12-year-old children were working in these things. And there was such an outrage by people in the United States, it forced Nike to change the way they did business, and they had to get rid of all the kids that working in these, quote, sweatshops, unquote. Now, here's the interesting thing. A guy went in and did a study to find out what happened to those kids. See, we think, well, they need to be in school. They need to not be working. Guess where those kids ended up?
Begging.
Most of them ended up in prostitution. Right? Because they had to make money to live to help their families survive. And since they got thrown out of their sweatshops and they couldn't work there anymore, they had to go into prostitution. So our good intentions, right, had bad results. And what we have to understand is that in a certain part of the growth of an economy, that sweatshops provide a stepping stone for people to begin to make money and pull themselves out of poverty. We had sweatshops in the United States at one point in time. Now, we've passed that, and what we have to do is help other countries grow and enter into the free market economy so they can grow faster, so that the time that they have to use this mechanism to rise, their people out of poverty is shorter than it would have been otherwise. But see, everybody in the United States has this kind of jaded concept because we live in such a place with it. There's so much incredible freedom. I was in Indonesia. I spoke at a big conference there last fall, and there is no religious freedom in Indonesia. And you can't imagine that. It was such a shock to me when they were telling me what they could do and what they couldn't do. They can't talk about their faith outside the walls of their church. If they do, they go to prison, right? And and we forget we have such economic freedom here. We have such religious freedom here, political freedom, and we're spoiled. And we don't realize how important those things are and how important it is to safeguard them if we want our country to get. Even in Chattanooga, Tennessee, we need to be working diligently to safeguard the freedoms that God has given us in this incredible country.
Well, I like the point
about it. Fourth of July is coming up next week. Instead of eating hot dogs and hamburgers, we need to be thinking about how incredible. One thing I'll challenge every single one of your listeners: go out this 4th of July, read through the Declaration of Independence, and tell me it doesn't just touch you in a way that you've forgotten about.
Well, on the matter of the poor and the housing market, Hugh Whelchel, there's this: the poor people can't have a shack because it looks bad. If you have my free trade zone or shantytown zone concept, the argument is, well, you're going to have crime, you're going to have prostitution. What about waste? Is there a septic system? Is there water where people can wash their clothes? Are there latrines? How does this all come about? So these are questions you might say against my theory, and yet it does allow the creation of the bottom of the market, which is prohibited from existing by regulation. So it seems to me that if people of charity and mercy have some say, they should want poor people at the bottom to be able to have some kind of place that they've made from scraps and other means that they've obtained that are within their incomes, which of course are zero.
Well, and the other thing we need to do is, as I said earlier, we need to provide a way for them to begin to climb the ladder of success, the ladder of flourishing. I've been to shanty towns in places like Mexico City, and what ends up happening, there is crime, there is prostitution, there's all these things you mentioned, and they become traps where people are entrapped, the poor people, and they can't get out. So what we have to do is we think about this process. We have to see it if we were to put these places in, we have to really see them as a stepping stone to help people up to the next level. It's a real important situation. I talk to people about poverty all the time, and there's two kind of schools of thought. There's what I call the give the guy a fish school of poverty. And then there's the teach a guy to fish. And, a lot of us kind of the free market people say, we need to go for the teach a guy to fish. And I think there's some real truth to that. But here's the problem. If a guy's starving to death and you're trying to teach him how to fish, he's going to eat the bait, right? I mean, so you have to be able to give people a hand up and give them a sense that they have hope and they're not going to starve tomorrow. Then you also have to begin to teach them how to fish after that, right? You have to teach them how to do something. And I think one of the things you're suggesting, gives them a glimmer of hope that they have a place to live, a place they can call theirs. It may not be much, but it's a start.
This is David Tillis. We're talking with Hugh Whelchel of the Institute of Faith, Work, and Economics. It's TIFWE.com. That's TIFWE.com. Hugh Whelchel, thanks for joining us.
Hey, I appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
This is David Tillis, Nuga Radio 927. I've got some important messages and some wonderful sponsors for you to hear about. David Tillis, Nuga Radio. Stay tuned.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
A Polk County man arrested with what police call a large amount of meth. Police say Brandon Ratcliffe appeared before Judge Sandy Mattis, who sentenced him to 70 months in prison. DEA agents obtained a search warrant for a raid at his home, where they say they found 56 grams of meth in an ammo can outside his home. Tennessee American Water